I just wanted to welcome everyone who's present in the room and coming in remotely. We're delighted to be supporting everyone for the 4th year in a row, and we look forward to chatting with you all throughout the course of the day and continuing our relationship with the VMA. Thanks.
Very quickly as well, I want to acknowledge ASM Global, who've been a long-time supporter of the VMA as a whole, but significant support provided here today in both the hosting here at the BCEC and then also in Sydney at Kudos Bank Arena, and also presenting our keynote speaker, who I'm about to introduce. So I really look forward to hearing from Dr. Catherine Ball. Associate Professor Dr. Catherine Ball is a scientific futurist, a speaker, advisor and author working across global projects where emerging technologies meet humanitarian, education and environmental needs. Catherine also likes to create businesses and champion movements, collaborate with peers, advise game changers and is a sought-after voice across the startup, futurist and tech world. Catherine works globally across a wide range of projects, from creating documentaries and world-leading conferences and events, through to advising the use of novel approaches across environmental and humanitarian projects. Catherine is a prominent community engagement with STEM, which is science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and likes to demystify emerging technology. So very warm welcome to Dr. Catherine Ball.
Hello everybody, and hello everybody coming in online. It's funny that I shall start the conversation today with a piece of convergent technology. So if you haven't heard of the expression yet, it's going to be very, very popular in about a year's time, I reckon. Convergent technology. It's what we hold in our hands. Something that we never thought we'd have our calendars, our phones, our timer, all built into one particular place. And it just goes to show that when technology works, we forget it exists. And that is one of the key things about new and emerging technologies, is that we get these big rushes of media going on about the next drone thing and the next robot thing and the next AI thing. But actually, the ones that are successful are ones that you probably don't even realize already exist. They're the ones that are already flying around doing things, the ones that are already working. The technology is hosting us internationally around the world, beaming in. Gosh, 20 years ago when I did my PhD, I look at what we achieved then versus what could be achieved now. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, because this area, Meanjin, Brisbane, has probably been one of the first venues for collaboration around innovation in human history. We have had meetings on these lands for thousands of generations for people to share knowledge, to come together, to exchange ideas. And that is why venues are absolutely key to how we go forwards as human society. And I don't say that without evidence behind this. So I'm going to walk you through some nuggets of information today. I've got about 40 minutes to go through the slides, then we'll have about 10 minutes of questions. Now, if there's one thing that I'd like you to know about me, is that I really like difficult questions. I really like ones that maybe people might think I don't agree with. So please feel free. I'm always happy to continue the conversations afterwards, but please feel free to think of some nice questions for me as we go forwards. So I was asked to talk today about emerging technology and empowering people, because I feel that those two things should be the same process. We have a lot of new technologies coming online these days, and we think about killer robots. You know, they've always got the English accent, haven't they, the killer robots? So I promise you I am not an android, or am I? The idea that we actually will have robots in society affecting how we live, work and play, they're already here. But without further ado, one of my earliest memories, and this is where I'm going to do a bit of a generation check in the room here. Who remembers Live Aid? Like live as Live Aid, not as like from Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie thing, right? Yeah, so I was born in August 1979. And so one of my earliest memories, my mum tells me, is watching on the news of the famine in Ethiopia that happened in the early 1980s. And I could not get my head around the fact that we were sat in this Midlands town in England, living our lives quite happily, and there were people that were literally starving, with babies that were starving, and I couldn't get my head around it. And I found it just so confronting. And I still do now. Look at me, I'm getting emotional. I'm a mother now, and so I look at it in a different lens as well. I think when you're a parent, you see those things in a different way. But I remember that being so terrible. But then I remember this being so fantastic, because it was us showing them that we cared. We all got together. Yes, it was for a rock concert, but we all got together for more than just a rock concert. We wanted our government to know that we gave two hoots. We wanted our funding bodies to know that we cared. We wanted our charities to know that we were bothered. We wanted the people of Ethiopia to know that we cared, that they were in trouble. And there's nowhere else you can do that apart from in a large stadium. So I never heard of Wembley. I never knew where it was on a map. But when I was 6 years old, I knew what Wembley Stadium was, and I saw the power of that crowd. And it was maybe some 15 years later when I went to, various festivals and stuff in the UK, and there's a feeling that happens as a human being when you are stood in a crowd listening to a band. I don't know how to describe it. I'm sure psychologists have written papers on this. But the fact that as human beings, we are social creatures. And I think in the last 18 months, with the pandemic and the lockdowns and the inability to travel, we have recognized this in a way that we've never had to recognize it before. Because again, it was so normal, it was invisible to us, that we could go to a conference, that we could go to a concert, that we could get together, that we could campaign about things, that we could care about things, that we could all experience something as a collective, which is just a visceral part of who we are as human beings. We are social animals. One thing we know is the reasons why venues exist is to allow people to come together, right? This is why we're here. This is our MO. And so one of the things we need to look at as we go forwards is the planet is going to take a bit of readjustment after this pandemic. We're going to have hiccups along the road. World peace seems like it's further away than it could ever be. The hand on the nuclear clock to midnight may go 1 minute closer. I hope it doesn't. I've got 2 very small children. But one thing I do know is that when you get groups of people who are different but care about the same thing together, magic happens. And so the reasons why we exist, the reason why this building exists that we're in right now, for me goes straight back to the reason what I remember about Wembley Stadium, about people caring, about people connecting, about people physically interacting with people who were different from themselves, who they wouldn't ordinarily meet. I remember going all the way to Chicago for the AUVSI, which is the American Drone Association's great big meeting, and I was catching up with Australians in Chicago, because we never got time to catch up together in Australia. But we managed to get an Aussie and Kiwi, we let the Kiwis in, we managed to get Aussie, Kiwi, favourite people of mine. I love New Zealand. That was supposed to be a really terrible joke, sorry. But we got, the Antipodes together, in Chicago. And you should have seen how jealous the Americans were. We let the Canadians in as well. But the reasons we will exist is because we're coming up against things. We're coming up against a nexus. We're coming up against juxtapositions where humans and technology are going to be colliding in ways that we actually need to talk about what this means for us as society and what this means for us as human beings. As we look at a more technologically advancing future, how do we make sure that the ethics are in place? Technology exists for us. We do not exist for technology. Now, if any of you have ever been tried to be sold like a drone system or sold a robotic system or sold an AI system, you'll think it was the other way around, right? This is you exist for this to exist in your workspace. No. Anyone here use Microsoft Excel? Ever in their lives? I still have a fundamental memory of the day I figured out what a $sign did in that spreadsheet function. Like, I had an epiphany. I was like, this does what? And the truth is that these technologies, these softwares, the hardwares, they're built by somebody with an idea of what they think they need to build as a solution. But they don't know you. They don't know how you work. They don't know the problems that you're dealing with on a deep vertical level. They'll have an understanding, of course. They'll have done their market research. But they're not you. They don't know that you don't know the $sign or you've just figured out what the $sign means in Excel. And so the key here is that when you're sold a solution, ask them what the problem is that they've identified. When I landed my job at the ANU, my boss said to me, she said, Kath, I could line up people that can sell me solutions, but I need someone who can find me problems. And I was like, well, I'm naturally an optimist, but yes, I can find problems. I'm like one of those truffle hunting dogs. Like, I can just go, find a problem. And if we can identify what those problems are, where the rub lies, as Shakespeare would say, that is when we can actually design the solutions that we want that are fit for us as society, that are fit for us morally and ethically, and the things that we will want to achieve. So what does this mean for venues? We will need to have more physical meetings going forwards. And we sit here with the unfortunate lockdown about to start down in Melbourne, so I don't say any of this not respecting the fact that we're still in the middle of a global pandemic. But when we look at what we've done with the technology around vaccines and around treatments, we know that we will never face a pandemic the same way that we faced this one. We will never, I hope to God, be as willfully ignorant in so many ways and unfortunately behind the times in so many others. We know now that we are here in Queensland developing new technology called siRNA. siRNA is a heat-seeking missile that looks for coronaviruses anywhere in your body, and it seeks them down and it destroys them. That treatment should be available in 2023. So if anyone has been exposed to any kind of coronavirus, be it SARS-1, MERS, or the novel SARS-2, you just take an injection, and apparently in mice, it cleared out 99.9% of the virus in their lung cells. Now, if that's not worthy of Nobel Prize, I don't know what is. But how many people in this room know what siRNA is? And that's not a negative sense on yourselves at all. I get to the point where I love sports, and so this is not anything against sports. We need rock concerts. But we need to start celebrating science the way we celebrate sports. We need to have stadia filled with people listening to, we might need to media train some of them, but listening to some of the best academic minds in this country. Because trust is fundamental to how emerging technology is going to be used in society. Trust only comes when you feel empowered by the technology that you're looking at. So there's maybe a bit of homework for you to have a Google of the Griffith University research around siRNA. Because when I read that article, I cried, as I do at the moment, with quite a lot of good news stories around the pandemic. Because the thing that they've done is that they've actually been prescient. They've looked at creating a piece of technology that's adaptable to any beta coronavirus. It doesn't matter if this one varies, because they're attacking a conserved part of the DNA. How are they able to do that? Informatics, bioinformatics. How are we able to have bioinformatics computing power that's a little bit stronger, I'd suggest, than a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet? How are we able to have that? Because we have learned how to develop supercomputers. How have we learned how to develop supercomputers? Well, in Australia, we've done it because we've had such a great history of looking, anyone look at the moon last night? Looking up at the stars, looking up at the moon. You know, there was a moon treaty that came out the year that I was born, 1979. And it wasn't ever ratified by the United Nations. But one of the big problems that I have with this is we've got drone missions going up to the moon to start mapping it for resource mining. If we don't see the moon as part of our ecosystem, is it going to be mined? In which case, what is that going to do to us? These are hard conversations that need people from around the world to ratify international agreements so that we don't kill ourselves. I will end on a positive note, by the way. So, one of the things that we have found that technology has also enabled us to do is to work in ways that some might hate, some might love, and I think there's a bit of a Buddhist approach happening to all of this now. We know from pre-pandemic research, there was a great piece of study done in the Japanese economy to work out what the ultimate working week would be. Now, if we take 7 days, say, as the week, how many days a week do you think we should be working for us to be at our optimal performance? I'll do a bit of a straw poll. Who thinks we need to be working 7 days a week? Thank God no one put their hand up. Who thinks we should be working 6 days a week? 5? 4? 3? 2? People at home can join in, I just can't see you. 1? It's 3. 3. So what they worked out was, and there's been things that have happened across places like Sweden where at 5 o'clock, the desks literally get taken off and held in the roof. So you can't actually physically access your computer. At 5 o'clock, you get a warning, 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 you haven't hit send on that email. Honey, you're not getting that until the next working morning. That's gone. And so this idea that we have these, again, right? We have these that are almost like, people worry about, oh, you know, I don't want to sign in at there, you know, I sign in, I give my government my location data. Do you think that you're not already being tracked? Privacy is a notion that died in the Matrix movies, all right? Died and gone. The reason why The Matrix chose 1998, do you remember that from that film? The reason why it chose 1998 as the year for the simulation it created is because it was the peak of human civilization, the flip phone, okay? So that was why it chose 1998. But if we think about it, this baby allows me to be attached to so many things. I had a minute, just before I came on stage, I had a notification from my son's kindy telling me he'd gone to the toilet, you know, because I need to know these things, right? But in all seriousness, you will not see a smartphone on my wrist, a smartwatch on my wrist, because there's something about Dame Vivienne Westwood, who's one of my favourite fashion designers. She talks about technology and the media like radio and television as a weapon of mass distraction. She says, I can't think if I'm constantly being interrupted. So there's something about the ability to disconnect as well as connect. And I think that's where we sometimes lose that balance. So the idea of economic stimulus around being able to travel and work anywhere, though I'd suggest this person isn't actually working, they're just posing, because that's terrible sunlight on that screen. You wouldn't be able to see a single thing. Is that, what does this mean for venues? What does this mean for events? Well, it means that when we want to get people together, they can choose how they interact with that event, and they can choose whether they hang on for a holiday or whether they work. Now, I was talking with Mr. Ashley Gordon, who's one of my business partners. He runs Carillion Conference Management. He's been running events for 36 years. And so I said to him, look, if we look at events as a potential source of tourism money, is it better or worse than the average tourist? Do people who attend events spend more? Is it worth more to that location, worth more to that venue, worth more to the hotels and the restaurants and all of that? And he said, well, you know, the research shows that events-based tourism, venue-based tourism is worth double on average than the average tourist. Double the money. Now, I'm not a politician. I was voted person most likely to be Prime Minister in my school yearbook, but I said I'd never set my sights so low. But if I was a politician and I was wanting to have tourism dollar, do you think I'd be giving you $1,500 to spend on holiday or $500 to spend on holiday? Or do you think I'd take a few $1,000,000 and talk to you lot and say, right, I understand that venue-based tourism is worth double standard tourism. How do we get venues up and running again as soon as possible? I say this as a person in front of you that owns an event. I run the World of Drones and Robotics Congress with Mr. Ashley Gordon from Carillion Conference Management, and we started that 5 years ago, nearly 6 years ago. And we held an event here in the Brisbane Convention Centre in November last year. And our COVID-safe plans were like handing over your firstborn child. It was almost like, could you just take the blood and then I don't have to fill out another COVID-safe plan? Just take the blood. It was very laborious, very necessary, totally respectful that it was totally necessary. But we were one of the few events to actually happen because we cared about making sure we still had an event in 2020 and we operate on a lean startup principle. So just out of sheer bloody mindedness, I said, we will have an event in 2020. We will do it. And what we also did then, we trialled a thing called hybrid, and I'll talk about hybrid in a moment. But one of the things that people said to me when we put this on, other than thank you so much for still doing this, was how? How did you do this? And I was like, because financially, the model of our event works differently to some of the traditionally managed events. So what does that mean for people like yourselves? Well, I'll be giving you all a bit of a call to action a bit later on about this. We need venues to have events so we can have more tourism money. We need this, though, also in the regions. So when we look at regional jobs and regional tourism jobs, we don't just want some randoms coming up for a weekend from Melbourne. We want people there for a whole week or 2 weeks because they've come for an event which is tax deductible. They're going to spend more money anyway, and they'll bring their family because it's been tough during the pandemic and they've not been able to travel. So make it a 2-week job. Seems quite logical for me. Anyone here ever seen any esports in action in any of your venues? Yeah, where's your venues that have had this? Where? Was it in Australia? Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So esports is something I've not seen a lot of in Australia, so that's interesting that we're getting it going now. So in places like South Korea and Japan and even the United States, even Europe, anyone heard of this game called Fortnite? Yeah, my children are too young to know what that is, and they never will know what that is. But Fortnite, for example, have these big global competitions where they literally fill 60,000-seater stadiums with people playing computer games. It sounds like something that's a little bit ridiculous, but aren't teenagers just a little bit ridiculous, right? This is something, there's a lot of money in esports. Games themselves as an industry are worth more than movies and music combined. So if you think the movie industry is important to venues, the games industry is really important to venues. Now, whether that means that you're hosting a hybrid event in a smaller venue, or whether you're actually hosting a big stadium full of people watching these finalists going at each other across these esports. Drone racing is up and coming. Australia had the world #1 drone racers based out of the Gold Coast. We were actually on the forefront of a lot of these things, and the pandemic has stopped a lot of this from happening. But this will come back, and it will come back so hot that if you don't have esports built into some of your venue plans or events plans, or you're looking at bidding at them, or you're looking at curating them, I'd suggest they are going to be a huge source of potential venue income. Now, who here's actually flown a drone? You are my people. Hello. Those of you that didn't put your hand up, can I please urge you to have a go at flying a drone? Because whenever I go and talk with board directors and we talk about new and emerging technologies, it's very difficult to explain to someone, oh, well, it's esports, it's esports, it's electronic sports, it's games, it's like Sonic the Hedgehog, but really big, and they sort of go, I really don't get it. I don't understand why that's important. You take that person out and you let them fly like a DJI Mavic Pro for 20 minutes and take a drone selfie, you have a changed person on your hands right there. Because that is the easiest way I have found to help people engage with the concept of emerging technologies. Drones have been around since 1896, okay? They've been around longer than traditionally crewed aircraft have. But they've not been where they are now, apart from the last, say, 5 to 8 years. They're not just the little toys that you can buy from JB Hi-Fi. They're not just the death machines of the media portraying in the media around warfare. They're actually incredibly complex and malleable platform technologies that can be used for lots of different things. And they're just one example. You then add in avatar robots. Who's been in an exoskeleton? Okay, exoskeletons for Christmas. You get an exoskeleton, you get an exoskeleton, you get an exoskeleton, right? So why are exoskeletons important? Exoskeletons are the new way of managing health and safety risk. So, for example, the average cost of someone with a slip, trip, fall, or a twist is about $150,000 to $200,000 of workers' comp and cost to yourself, and you have to get in other staff, and it's just a HR nightmare. And if you look at this from even in the venue space, putting up rigging and dogging and all that kind of stuff. The health and safety risk of actually even building that venue space involves physical labor. Now, one of the things we know is you can get full body exoskeletons like the military have. You can get ones that just support your back. You can get ones that support your shoulders. So if you're working over height, anyone ever painted a ceiling? Oh my gosh, your shoulders after painting a ceiling. Can you imagine working constantly with your arms above you? So the average cost of an exoskeleton is around $5,000 to $10,000. Average cost of a workplace health and safety incident, $200,000, $150,000. Why do we not have exoskeletons, basically, throughout society right now? Why don't we have them? Because I don't think people fully understand the risk of not having them. I also don't think the technology is particularly perfect yet, but this is where you all have a role to play, in that creating opportunities accelerates the technology. Technology exists for you. You do not exist for the technology. So this is an example here of beam robots. Has anyone seen these at their venue yet? Really, no one's had a beam-in robot in their venue. We have here, we've had these come in as part of World of Drones and Robotics. So for example, with the 300 or so people that are beaming in live today, they could be on one of these. They could be walking around, saying hello to you, reading your name badge. You could even draw a little mustache on them. They wouldn't even know. The ability to avatar. Everyone knows that movie, Avatar? It's not about big blue creatures on an alien planet. It's about the ability of putting yourself into a place where you're not physically at. This is how we're going to build colonies on Mars. We're not going to be shipping young people over to Mars. We're going to be shipping avatar robots. And the people will be operating them from planet Earth. And the robots will be on Mars. Why? Health and safety law. We're not going to be sending people off. I don't think, in a commercial big sense. I certainly wouldn't sign off on it as a director. I'd be like, where's the avatar suits? So the beam-in robots are the new way of being somewhere without being there. Now, you see, this is just, my husband just grabbed this photograph from me, so this is not an advert. I'm not sponsored by Beam themselves. These were one of the first ones that came to market. You notice that they've got that one with the red cross on it, the sort of the medical one. So the idea being that you could get medical advice if someone's having an incident or an accident. We know there are drones that carry defibrillators already that actually give you voice control and video control over it. So the idea to beam in into something, to experience something in a hybrid sense, rather than just watching something through your TV screen or through your video screen or through your computer screen. The idea that you could actually physically be catching up with people and having a nice little side chat. You know how we like these nice little side chats? Meeting someone that you've never met before, having a laugh about beaming in, showing them your cat, you know, having a little side chat, creating those natural collisions that we make when we come to events. If we can't physically be there yet for the next few years, this is the way you can physically be there. You can pre-organize your robot to maybe have little business cards on it that you can post in advance. You can, you know, have pictures of talk to me about this or talk to me about that, something like that. So this thing called hybrid vigor is a concept that comes from plant breeding science. But the idea that you take two different types of plants and you crossbreed them and you create a better strain of plant. It's probably in the bread that you ate today. It's the super wheats that we created after World War II here in Australia. So how do we create hybrid vigor when it comes to venues? Using technology is one thing. Working with the technology to tell them what you want is another thing entirely. And that's where it gets to the point of you go, okay, Catherine, I look at these beaming robots, but it's like when we invented cars. You're going to have someone walking in front of it with a red flag to warn everyone that the beaming robot is coming behind you, right? No, we don't want to do that. So what we want to do is have this idea that as soon as a technology is acceptable, it's invisible. So I'd suggest in the next 12 to 18 months, in all of your venues, you will have beaming robot capabilities. Or you should try and encourage beaming robot capabilities. You should try and look at exoskeletons. You should have a look at some of the drones. I'll talk about drones at the very end. None of these things are perfect, but they all add a bit of value. They all add that little bit of extra spark. And if it gets to the point that maybe when people have realized the travel budgets and how much it costs for their staff, they're going to reduce the amount of travel they're going to allow people to do. But they won't stop them attending conferences. They'll just be coming in on one of these, rather than physically being here, which means as a venue, what does that mean? Well, they'll still charge a registration cost, so there'll still be financial viability. It means that you might need to have more power stations or charging stations available for them. You won't have to feed them. So there'll be this whole new ecosystem of where you can earn money as a venue by having these capabilities present. So when people come to choose you, they know that they can use beaming robots. Now, I'm sure that you saw in the UK, they moved very quickly during the pandemic at the very early stages to creating these things called Nightingale hospitals. Now, I stand here as a British person, and I know that one way our government likes to try and pacify people is by using historical context to things. So Florence Nightingale, well, no one's going to argue with Florence Nightingale, are they? So call them Nightingale hospitals. Everyone will love it. And they did. We loved the fact that we had Florence Nightingale hospitals. We didn't like the fact we were going to potentially need them. But this is where, again, we look at other countries and how they responded to the pandemic. So instead of having to build a brand new hospital from scratch, we knew that we had inherently already built into our cities and our suburbs and our regions a place where we could all come together to actually solve the problems that we were facing, a place where we could organise mass vaccination sites, a place where we could organise hospital ICUs, a place where we could organise treatment facilities, a place where we could actually house if we needed to bring in military support, if we needed to move people away from a certain area to a certain area because there was a flood or a fire or a power outage or there'd been a terrorist attack, a way in which we could move a lot of people out of a certain place. We know our cyclone, our cyclone-rated buildings up north, when there's a cyclone going over, where do you go? You leg it to the nearest safe place. Our venues are at the heart and soul of emergency response of our cities, our suburbs, and our regions. And I think people have recognised, actually, the value of having good, solid, big venues in our cities, that when we need to get something done, like the MCEC at the moment is being used as the vaccination hub there in the CBD, fantastic. No one's got an excuse. You walk past the thing, queue up and get your vaccine, right? And if it was going to hit the fan, we knew that we could switch this place. The BCEC could have become a field hospital, just like the Nightingale hospitals were set up. They never actually, this one is the one in Birmingham, that if my mum, she's vaccinated now, thank God, but if she was dying, this is where she would have gone. Now, there was a bit of a dark media angle to some of this, which I think we all should be mindful of. So we all know venues are managed, and sometimes those management organisations might be global, might be international, might be foreign countries that have invested into certain business types. But of course, what the press in the UK, the tabloid press, love to do is always find a way to have a go. And the way they decided to have a go about the Nightingale hospitals was because they worked out how much money the NHS, and again, don't ever have a go at the NHS, ever, of course. So the way they worked out, the NHS is spending millions renting these venues that are in our country to international organisations. You have to remember the PR about these things and the openness and transparency when it comes to wartime mentality. So I think there's a bit of a dark lining to that conversation around having Nightingale hospitals, was that suddenly people were angry that they were having to pay people that owned and operated them that weren't British. They voted for Brexit, remember? No comment on that. I made my own personal Brexit in 2010, so I can't really comment. So I'm Australian now, despite my accent. Has anyone here been through Tokyo Airport? Do you remember what happened to you at border control? Anyone remember what sat there looking at you at border control in Tokyo? Shout it out. Thermal cameras. I had never seen such a thing in my life. I'd never seen them. And I sort of stood there with my little 12-week-old child. I was there doing some work for World of Drones and Robotics. We went out to Japan and Hong Kong and South Korea, as one does with a 12-week-old. But, you know, one of the things that I saw when I looked at this was, it was old. They were old thermal cameras. They weren't new. They were there from the very first SARS back in the early 2000s. So that equipment had been there and was being used and constantly being used to monitor people. Now, what I didn't realise was that they actually worked. Luckily, we weren't sick. No one in our party was sick. But the previous World of Drones Congress, I'd had a keynote speaker flying in from Japan. But he'd caught a flu. And they stopped him using those very cameras at that very border position. They actually stopped him leaving Japan. Now, I was pregnant at the time, so I was actually quite glad he didn't come over, because I could have got sick with the flu or whatever it was that he had. And everyone knows pregnant women can't take many medications when you're sick, and the way to really annoy a pregnant woman is to give her some kind of flu or cold virus. It's just, yeah, we hate you forever. But so the idea that as human beings, venues have a great way of looking at population health, right? We have a way of monitoring now using videos. I hate to say it, there are certain things that artificial intelligence can do now that actually has started to blow my tiny mind. They can look at how you walk, how you physically walk, without knowing you're being monitored. And there is software that will pick up whether or not you've got Parkinson's before you've ever shown a single symptom. We look at children now and how they walk. They're actually able to start picking up autism spectrum and neurodivergence by how the children move their body. They are able to look at detecting people having neurological medical conditions before you've had a single tremor, before you've tripped over a single thing. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we want? What do we want these things to be able to do? If we were able to, say, monitor the public health, the way we've handed over a lot of our privacy over the last 18 months, can we just say that? Not that we actually had any privacy, of course, but we have actively handed over privacy in a conscious way for the greater good. Now, who is it to say that it's not a really good idea for venues to say, we are going to actively help monitor population health. We're going to have thermal monitoring at all of our venues. We're also going to be collecting video for medical research into gait analysis regarding things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Do you consent? Tick, right? There's ways in which we can use facial recognition software to track people. They have it on drones in the States, that if you're a wanted crim and they're trying to track you down, the police have drones that fly around with cameras on with facial recognition software, and if they find you, they will follow you until they arrest you. These drones will just fly around and follow you. They'll pick people out of the crowds. Part of me is really excited by that. I think that's really clever. Part of me is absolutely terrified. What happens if I look just like a criminal? What if there's a crim version of me running around that the algorithm thinks it's me? We all know that people are wrongfully convicted. We look back at old different types of convictions and DNA and all that kind of thing. We pull things apart and we hope people haven't been on death row and in the States and stuff. They get saved at the last minute because there's a new piece of DNA. What's going to happen? What's going to happen when it comes down to your data was collected here, you need to go into quarantine? You go, well, I wasn't even in that city. I wasn't physically there. How could you have found me there? So this idea that artificial intelligence, we call it artificial intelligence. We don't call it artificial stupidity or artificial, a computer says yes or computer says no, written by an algorithm in a black box by a bloke in San Francisco. We call it artificial intelligence. We expect it to be able to do things that we can't do. I just want to tell you all right now, there's no artificial intelligence on this planet that can do something that humans can't do. They might be able to beat people at games of chess, but the players can always beat them at least once. They might be able to beat people playing Go. The players can actually almost always get at least one game back at the AI when they're playing it. There is no AI that can write a decent pop song. There's no AI that can write something like Shakespeare. There's no AI that can tell me how I'm feeling. It can have a guess, but it can never know. And we're nowhere near the singularity yet. Quantum computing, that might change things. But at the moment, we're not there. So what do venues have as a role in the future of public health and the future of emerging technology? I'd say there's lots of roles you can play. It depends on what you want. It depends on what your boards want. It depends on what your business wants. It depends on what the place in where you live and work wants and needs. And so if we talk about emerging technologies, who here sits on a board or is in the C-suite of the organization they work in? You're all owners, leaders of the venue associations that you work in, or the buildings that you work in. How many of you have like an active innovation committee? Excellent. Handful. So that's my other piece of homework for you all. One of the things we know is that fewer than 3% of Australian company directors have any STEM skills. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone needs to go out and get some kind of engineering degree, but what I am suggesting is that if we don't understand STEM, if we can't look forwards with these technologies and actually be able to disagree with them, interrogate them, work out what is the problem we're trying to solve, if you don't have STEM skills on your board, you need some. How do you get some of those quickly? You set up an innovation committee, you work with your local universities, your local startup hubs, your local geeks, you find someone who's working on a project that you like what they've done, and you get them around the table and you talk with them about the ideas. You meet every month or every quarter or whatever it is with coffee and sandwiches, and you get the conversations started. Now, this is not actually a Domino's pizza drone flying in a stadium. My husband produced this photograph for me, so that's not real. But there is already a wiener drone, I say this, it's a hot dog drone in the US, that if you order a hot dog from your seat and you tell it which seat you're in, it doesn't use facial recognition software to work out that it's you that's paid for it, it just knows which seat you're in, and you order a hot dog, it will bring that hot dog to your seat. Anyone remember queuing for like at least half an hour for a beer and a pie at a venue somewhere? No more. You can order from your seat and have it delivered to you with a drone, if you want it. If you want it to be able to do that. And so the health and safety around some of these technologies, would you really want flying blades delivering hot dogs? Probably not. So the drone's going to look a bit different. And we do have bladeless drones. We have drones that don't have blades at all. They work on jets, jet engines. Everyone heard of a jet engine? We've got drones with jet engines. The other thing here as well is that facial recognition is great. You might say, oh, I'd like to order a beer, but I'm not going to be in my seat. Can you come and find me? And it will come and find you if it wants and bring you your beer. Google Wing have been operating out of Canberra for the last few years doing their trials, but their first commercial operations for drone delivery is Logan. They chose Logan because it's an up-and-coming area with young families that might want to buy bread, buy paracetamol, buy coffees, get things delivered right to where they live. So drone delivery is here already. Drone delivery in stadiums is not. And I'd suggest that that's something that we might want to consider. Health and safety-wise, social distancing-wise, the reduction of people interacting with staff-wise, there's lots of reasons why we would want to have some of those remote technologies. I was talking with Harvey Lister, though, about the idea of spraying the seats in the Suncorp. They were going to do some trials using drones to spray the seats down to kill the virus and stuff. Everyone's seen what a flip seat looks like. What does a drone do? It doesn't have an arm that can open the seat, unless you develop a drone that can open the seat and spray it at the same time. And the existing drones don't, because again, it was a solution trying to be sold to someone who didn't fully understand the problem. They didn't fully understand how those seats would work or how you would need to actually move those chairs to be able to spray them, you know, with the antiviral solutions or whatever. The UV, you know, we've got those UV things that be flying up and down. Don't ever get trapped in a UV room, you know, and getting treated, you know, come out with a tan. But the idea that new and emerging technologies post-pandemic are going to be very hot, and you'll probably all get bombarded with emails of people that can sell you a wonderful solution. My first ask for you to do is to write back and say, tell me what my problem is. Because if that company can then pick up the phone and call you and tell you what your problem is, you're probably onto a winner. If they just then try and sell you their stock standard response, you're probably not going to be onto a winner. So with that, I will be able to take a few questions. And I hope that I've given you a few nuggets to think about today. Technology is something that unfortunately sits in a silo. It unfortunately sits in the hands of the geeks and the startups, and I class myself as both of those things. But the final thing for me is when we look at new and emerging technologies, we need to look at new and emerging business models. So when I created World of Drones and Robotics Congress with Carillion Conference Management, it was in the loving embrace of the Brisbane Convention Centre. They said, it was Harvey that said around a courier mail lunch during this Go Queensland campaign, he was like, we need to start creating world-leading conferences. Rather than constantly going out in the red ocean strategy that Harvard might describe it as, the red ocean strategy, you go out and you compete. You go, okay, we want this geological congress, we want this cancer congress, we want this congress. We're going to bid. We're going to fight. What happens if you create it yourself? No one fights with you for it. It's called Blue Ocean Strategy. It's a really interesting book that came out of Harvard a few years ago. So Blue Ocean Strategy around new and emerging technologies, the way conferences are going to be hybrid, the way you're going to use beaming technology, the way you're actually going to create local venue-based events, working with the universities, working with the startup hubs, working with the state and local and federal governments, actually creating those opportunities. That is why World of Drones and Robotics Congress exists. We're the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere, and we're going global. And we're taking the model and we're going global because of the networks that we've built over the last 5 years. I could not have done that without the support of the Brisbane Convention Centre and their foresight with the idea that instead of competing for these little piecemeal bits or competing for the big ones, but how many times do you not win? And as an academic, we spend over 30% of our time bidding for funding. I would sooner enter the lotto or put it on a horse, because I would sooner have my academic friends working on the problems they're trying to solve than filling out forms seeking funding all the time. We have to change how we fund academic research. It's such a waste of time to have a Nobel Prize-winning scientist spending 30% of their time filling out grant applications. There'll be an artificial intelligence for that soon. They won't need to do it. But yes, so that's my final love note to Brisbane Convention Centre. And thank you for having me today. And I'm happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn, anyone watching from home. Please feel free to connect if you have any questions or interest in anything that I've raised today. But hopefully we've got a few awkward questions.
We're open for questions now, so if anyone's got one, just pop your hand up and I'll do my best to run in a very masculine way over to you.
Like in slow-mo.
Anyone?
Yay! We've got the mic coming over.
Bukes.
Can you just let everyone know, so for the people watching at home as well, say who you are and where you work?
Yeah, I'm David Buchanan. I'm the membership manager at the GABA. And I just wondered, when your two little children ask you a question, do you speak with the same rapidity?
The speak with the same what, sorry?
When your two little children ask you a question, do you answer at the same rapidity of that you have delivered your excellent dialogue to us today?
Oh, thank you so much. I do apologise. I do talk fast, but I think faster. This is my problem. I have to slow myself down before. You should listen to what's going on in here half the time, honestly. My 3.5-year-old, yeah, he's pretty clued up. I try and speak to them in French sometimes, though, to be honest. I'm trying to get that second language in. But yes, if anyone's having trouble understanding anything I've said, just watch this back at like 0.75 speed on the recording. Thank you. We've got another one. Hi.
Rod Pilbeam from ASM Global. What would you suggest to us if we've got a problem that we want to get solved? How should people think about going about finding the person who can come up with a solution and innovate that solution for them?
You know what my big recommendation might be? For every organisation or every local venue to have, we all have our ambassadors, right? So we have our cherry-picked ambassadors for each of our locations. Go to your ambassadors, because this is what they're there for, and say to your ambassadors, we need to have like an innovation subcommittee or some kind of problem-solving committee where we need you to recommend who the best people you know are to have around there. Every group or organisation, I think, should have a chief innovator or should have a chief entrepreneur type person inside their network that allows them to tap into who's the right person to bring around that table. Your local universities that you've probably got great relationships with, most of the big universities around Australia and the Asia Pacific have business schools or have ways in which they can tap into some of that entrepreneurial mindset. But my favourite place for you to tap into would be the engineers. Because the one thing I know from working in the College of Engineering and Computer Sciences, some of the best solutions finders, especially in the new school of cybernetics, they either work on the problems themselves or they know somebody who did. So I'm going to be a bit biased and say ask the engineers. But you don't have to do these things in a silo either. I mean, you've got the wonderful VMA here. So it could be that if you have a problem that you think affects the whole industry, you put a call out to get half a dozen of you together, and then you put a call out, you know, offer some money to get some people in to spend a day's workshop with you. I'm a board director, and I get involved in a number of different advisory roles. And one thing I really love is a good strategy day. I really love a well-organised, well-operated, well-run strategy day. So if you have like a person that you know that can corral cats to actually get to that problem, then a good strategy day is always worth having. I'd say go from like 10 to 3, not like 8 till 6, because it's a bit tiring.
I was just going to say that the universities have some way sometimes to financially profit from work that you do of develop products in conjunction with universities, so they're quite keen to work with people, anyone, they'll listen. But just more a validation of something you said, Doctor, was there's a little gate I've got out the front that is not particularly that one, but certainly the same one can be fitted with thermal imaging and facial technology. So we actually will stop a guest coming into a venue if their temperature is too high. So that technology is here. It's actually sitting out the front there.
Do you want to tell everybody who's at home who you are and your website? Tell everyone at home who's watching who you are and your website.
Access Australia, so Access, AXESS.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.